Hi, this is Tim Stafford, and you're listening to Bluegrass Jam Along, the podcast for anyone and everyone who plays bluegrass.
So my guest on Bluegrass Jam Along this week is Tim Stafford, and those of you who've been listening for a while will know Tim's been on before. We had a chat about Blue Highway Fest, and we had a chat about Tim's book, about Tony Rice, and we also chatted about Tony Rice for the Tony Rice specials. But I'm delighted to welcome Tim back because he's got a new album out called Guitar Melodies, which I'm just loving and just really keen to talk to him about. So Tim, welcome back. It's great to see you again.
Thanks for having me, Matt. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
And this is such a good record. When I talked to you before, you'd had the record out with Tom Utes, and that was just about to come out last time we spoke. But it's been a while since you've done like a purely guitar record, isn't it?
Yeah, I did one in 2017 called Acoustic Guitar, and it had one vocal number on it. So I guess this is the only all instrumental record I've ever done, but the focus of that other one was definitely, original instrumentals. And I mean, I just had a ton of them laying around, and I thought if I didn't record them, they ain't going to get cut, so I better go ahead and do them. Blue Highway has cut a few of my tunes in the past, but in the last, 5 or 6 records or more, Jason usually writes, our banjo player, Jason Burleson, usually writes a tune that we end up recording. And so I've just been sort of focusing on, in the Blue Highway stuff, submitting my regular lyric tunes, vocal tunes. And so, there are a few instrumentals I would have thought I'd like to do with Blue Highway, but, and probably will at some point, but recently it hasn't been the case.
And this is an interesting mix, isn't it? Because there's obviously quite a few instrumental originals of yours on there, but there's also a couple of traditional tunes and a couple of covers as well. But it's not just, there's some solo guitars, some duets, some full band stuff. So there's a real sort of mix of stuff on there. And it's just like, as soon as I started listening to this record, when you sent it over to me, it reminded me when we first spoke, we talked about this idea of yours of the 5 T's of timing, tone, tuning, technique, and taste. And I just felt like I was listening to that. Like, there were all of those things were present, and it's just such a beautiful sound to start with.
Well, thanks, Matt. That's I hope that's the case, because I really try to think about all those things when you're playing, and you're doing these things. I don't think a lot of people, when they start out playing, they don't think about things like tone, because you just want to learn the tunes. And I get it. When I first started playing, man, I just loved the fact that I could play a few tunes and get this sound, and everybody wants to do that, and they concentrate on technique as a result. But the tone that you get is so fundamental, and I really want to focus on that as much as I can, but it takes a concentration. You have to really think about tone while you're playing in order to do that. It doesn't come overnight, and it's a combination of factors about with your right hand and learning where to put your hand, how to hit the strings with your pick. And even I mentioned this in my video too about the azimuth of the pick and how it's turned and how you move it. You and I talk about Tony Rice and how he used his thumb so much with his pick, Rest of us probably don't do that, but we still have to think of ways when we hit the strings, how are we getting the maximum tone? And to me, it's all about making your upstrokes, if you're going to alternate, sound as good as your downstrokes. That's what it's all about. If you can master that one thing, you can get good tone. And I try to work on that every time that I practice. And, when I'm working on tunes, I'm fanatic about trying to make sure that they're even enough to where you're going to get as much tone out of an upstroke as you are a downstroke. And, and then there's the other things too, the timing. I mean, that only comes through practice too, just to working with that metronome, those YouTube. I do a lot of practicing on YouTube now because you can find all the beats there, including like some great drum tracks, like some funk drum tracks. I love that kind of drum track because it seems like it gets me excited about playing along with it. So many syncopations in it, and you can also everything that's ever been done, you can slow it down on YouTube now. It has the slow downer built into it, so it has everything you need as a teaching tool. We didn't have a few years ago. It takes all these other things we used to have and puts them all together. So so I hope that comes across in these tunes because I am trying to think about all those things when I'm playing.
Yeah, and it really does. And I think particularly with tone, some of these tunes are pretty slow. And when you're playing slowly and you're playing on your own, if you haven't got tone, then it might be interesting to listen to a track once, but you're not going to go back and listen to it again and again. And that's where the depth comes from, really, isn't it? And I was thinking about like a track like there's two sort of covers on here, and one of them's "While My Guitar Gently Weeps," and the other one is "Both Sides Now" by Joni Mitchell, and they're both like lyrical, relatively spacious melodies. And there's not, if you're going to make them sing and give them some sort of quality that stands up even without a vocal, then that sort of tone and also the just the phrasing and they're a really interesting challenge because you hear particularly fingerstyle guitarists do this all the time. They'll take a melody and arrange it for solo guitar, and often what you hear is the problem solving bit of it because there's a lot of problems to solve when you're doing this.
Yeah, exactly.
But they don't always end up being a piece of music you can like sit and get lost in. And I think both of yours on here, they have that quality of even though they're both tunes I know really well, I felt like I just was listening to a tune and I wasn't thinking about that or the technique so much or just hearing a line,
Oh, that's a cool way to look at it. I really try to think of the lyric too, which is something not a lot of instrumental players think about. I don't think, especially flat pickers. But the second verse is different from the third verse because there's different words, and the way you approach it is, I'm actually thinking about that cloud verse, and I'm thinking about that life verse at the end when I'm doing that. And I add another verse in there. I don't follow the straight structure on While My Guitar Gently Weeps. But I kind of did that on purpose too, because I wanted to, after I did that high part, I wanted to go back and accentuate that A part of the song. But yeah, I mean, it is a real challenge. And like you said, there's a problem to be solved. And sometimes we get so caught up as guitarists in the problem and how we're going to get around it that we don't think about as much as we should communicating the idea, and the feeling. And I think that is a real big part of it. Those melodies, man, especially those two, I don't know what it is. I mean, they're from my youth, I may have told you this, Matt, but I've got two sisters. They're 12 years older than me, and they're twins, twin sisters. And so in 1964, they were 16 years old. So I went through the entire British invasion. I went through the entire Beatles phenomenon. With them, I had no choice, but I was only 4 when it started. So, but boy, you talk about getting stuck in your head, man. I mean, all those Beatles tunes are just still there in my head, and they're a background for everything I do, I think, because I heard them so much. And the same is true of a melody like Both Sides Now. My God, it's such a beautiful melody. But the lyric, I mean, the first time I heard it, I was just like, I can't believe these two things have been combined like this. It's like, how do you get a melody this beautiful? And then on top of that, how do you get this set of lyrics that's I just had to read it over a few times, take them down. And I remember writing down the lyric and saying, wow, God, this is so incredible. And it's before you could look it up on the internet and just look at it. But I slowed it down, listened to every word, and wrote it down. I was just amazed by the lyric, and I was very young, when that came out. When that had been about 68, somewhere in there, 69, might have been 70, and I was only 9 or 10 years old, but it really made an impact on me, and so that's why I wanted to do the song. Is it still makes an impact on me when I hear it. Every time I hear it. I think I heard the Judy Collins cover first before I heard Joni Mitchell's version, and it's a beautiful version. And there's a couple of things like when it goes to the 5 chord and does the suspended 5 arpeggio. That's from the Judy Collins version. That's not in the Joni version. So, in her version, you've got this alternative tuning thing going on, and a lot of what she did it's pretty amazing to listen to anyway. But that wasn't the approach I wanted to take on this. Just find a nice open way to play it, which I ended up using a capo that is short. It only covers 4 strings. And so it kept the top string open to a D, the bottom string open to an open A. So I essentially played it that way with the A open on the bottom. Gave me more resonance, because originally when I played the tune, I actually played it out of open or regular G, and this just seemed to have a lot more sustain and a lot more ability to bring out some notes. So, that helped phrase the song for me and put it in a context. But what a great melody, I decided to call the album Guitar Melodies because I just had a lot of them that I had thought up, and I thought, well, I want to put the melodies that I love, because there's so many melodies. What speaks to me most for some reason in the song, the lyric can kill me too. But what do you bring away first when you hear something? It's usually that melody in it. I mean, that's what strikes most people. It stays with them. It hits them first, and it stays with them longest. You can take a really bad set of lyrics, put it to an incredible melody, and people are going to remember it. You can't say the other way around.
Yeah, tune can be really moving, even if it's sung in a language you don't know. You can go and sit and listen to a bit of opera sung in Italian. You've got no idea what they're singing about, but the melody can be incredibly moving.
Absolutely.
It's interesting with that arrangement of both sides now, and both of those actually, because it is the kind of tune that a lot of people would fingerpick. And when you do that, you can play like a bass note or a harmony note and the melody at the same time. When you flat pick those, you've got to then make some choices about where you put the bass notes between, because the melody comes first, obviously. So then you're not just putting the harmony notes and the bass notes sort of square on the beats, and you have to think around them a bit and maybe strum a few bits. I just going back and listen to it after the first few times when I just got a bit lost in it. When you listen back to it, hearing those sort of the approach to that is really interesting.
Yeah, and the version of it that most guitar players probably know is Randy Scruggs' version from the Will the Circle Be Unbroken album. And that is a fingerpick version where he uses almost exclusively the high register. He plays the low bass notes, but he does it up high. And I wanted to do that one time through to accent that one verse, but I didn't want to do it all the way through because I wanted it to go someplace. I wanted to have someplace to go. And yeah, you're right, man, because since you're not playing simultaneous notes like you would as a finger picker, you've got to make decisions about where to put the other notes. Like you said, you can either do a strum, you can do an offset thing with a melody, which I do sometimes a lot, where the timing is such that it implies where the melody goes. It doesn't actually play it so much. I do that actually in the first 5 of the song. But they also use a technique too that we talked about with Tony and Clarence White, where I play with the pick and 2 fingers. And I do that at the M because it's got the phrase that goes on the end of the melody into the 5 chord before the chorus is just set up for that. To me, it's got that. It needs that harmony. So I was able to do that with the pick and the fingers. I don't do a lot of that, but I love that sound. I mean, there are players who just concentrate on that technique exclusively. It's just incredible. But and people like Tony could do it, and it sounded like he was playing all of it with 3 picks. I don't know how you do that. Clarence was great at that too, but I just wanted to use it there to accent that the harmony that works so well on those phrases. And you know what I'm talking about. So
yeah, and I think Richard Thompson does it quite a lot on electric guitar as well. And I think sometimes guitarists, when you're playing fingerstyle, just think of that Travis picking, like the thumb just slips into easy patterns, and actually breaking out of that in the way that you do when you play with a pick, or the way somebody like Leo Kottke does, where it just doesn't go for. Because I think it's too easy just to slip into the alternating bass thing with your thumb when you're playing fingerstyle, and but a pick, it makes you choose a bit more, doesn't it?
That's exactly what it is. You nailed it.
And the other thing that really sort of stood out, like from the first track from Margaret Falls, both there's a sort of thread of timing that runs throughout this record. There's quite a bit of syncopation and quite a lot of phrases that sort of flow slightly across the beat and across bar lines, and there's just something lovely about it. Fits in with those 5 T's really, but it's this idea of, I remember when I started having guitar lessons with Brian Sutton at Artist Works, he talked a lot about connecting the notes. You're not just playing a series of individual notes, you're sort of trying to string them together and let them ring and play them. And just that, from the first couple of phrases of that opening tune, that's such a lovely, and through all of the tunes, just this lovely line. And when you're playing either solo or, some of the duet stuff, and even the band stuff, you're still fairly exposed on a record like this. And there's a lovely line that runs through all those phrases.
Well, I appreciate that. It's Margaret Falls. That's a place that's just over the hill here from where I'm sitting. It's we built a house last year down here in Greene County, Tennessee, and we sit in the Nolichucky River Valley, which the Nolichucky River is just less than a quarter of a mile from my house right down here. It runs in a big loop around this neighborhood. And then we have a really great view of the Bald Mountains, which is part of the Blue Ridge. And the Blue Ridge Mountains here that come across, there's a number of waterfalls down in the watershed from that, and Margaret Falls is the closest one. It's a beautiful hike and a beautiful spot over there. So when I wrote the song, this is the way I do all my tunes, Matt. I'll come up with tunes and I'll record them, and then I'll have this stupid name for it. Like I think this one was called water descending E figure or something like that. Because it sounded like water, when it sounded like water falling. And so I thought, well, golly, Margaret Falls, because that's a waterfall that I've been to. But if you listen to it too, it's got the it's got that 4 chord that has it's got a 9 in it. So it's actually I like having that because then you go to the 6. So, but that is sort of a roll, like a banjo roll. And I did another tune that Blue Highway recorded called Horseshoe Bend that has a similar kind of roll in it. So, and then I did one on one of my records called Whiskey Island, which is another water thing. And because that kind of sounds like water, that whole thing just sounds like water flowing, either a river or a waterfall. But it's a little different roll, that one is. And it's not, it's kind of like Earl Scruggs banjo rolls, you know, they weren't all forward rolls, weren't all reverse rolls, and he would do part of one and half of another and string them together, like you said, Brian said, string the notes together. But so it's still got that. Like, so you can tell that is similar to that. So I noticed John Lawless in the review he did in Bluegrass Today, he said that song is built around the motif that I've done in the past, and that's what he's talking about. He's talking about the roll that's in Horseshoe Bend and a couple other things. So I like the kind of thing. It's different from straight flat picking fiddle tunes. You know, to me, it's got a little different feel to it.
Yeah, and because it's got that combination of the roll, which sort of has a bit of forward momentum, but it's sort of moving down through the strings, so the pitch is sort of falling, but also rolling up and then back down. It's got that lovely cascading little feel to it, which does, like you say, you know, makes you think about water.
Yeah, it did me. So that's why I called it Margaret Falls. But I've been meaning to do a video, maybe, and go over to Margaret Falls here and take some video, maybe put it on there. That would be kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful spot. And
there's another lovely sort of water-themed tune on this right at the end called Tranquil Tides. That's just beautiful. I mean, I love it's like you were saying earlier on, this idea of like a melody. It's pretty simple. It puts me a little bit in mind of like some of the Scottish airs or a tune like A Shoken Farewell or something that's just like the kind of tune that can be hard to play because there's nowhere to hide. And if you're not expressing something with it, it's just a tune. It's a beautiful tune, but like it's, you know, and the way it's supported by those strings is just a beautiful way to close the record.
Well, thanks. I had the same technique as I did with Both Sides Now, where I had the capo that only covered 4 strings. So I did it the same way. I kept the bottom 5th string and the 6th string open, and so it's in It's in the key of A. Now you could put a capo on and move it anywhere. You can put 2nd fret and make it a B thing, you know, move it up, or 1st fret, make it B flat. And then I left the 1st string open on it. So it has a certain tonality, but I was just messing around with that. You know, in fact, the name of this song was Funny Capo Song in my files. And then when I started listening to it, I was like, well, that's very peaceful, you know. So I thought, and I actually was going to call it Mare Tranquille, which is Italian for tranquil tides. And I thought, no DJ in the United States is going to be able to pronounce that. So it just became Tranquil Tides. And I didn't know exactly. I knew how the tune would go, and I actually recorded it all the way through. But I knew I was going to have Dave Egger come in and play cello on it. So I left it open, and after he did his part, it became even more Tranquil Tides to me because it sounded like that. Dave is so incredible. I just found myself really, really lucky to know Dave and to be able to play with him. He's just an incredible musician who is from New York City, who grew up in Long Island and was Aaron Copland's sole pupil on the piano when he was a 5-year-old. His mother lived in the same neighborhood and took him over to Aaron Copland's house, knocked on the door and said, would you consider teaching my son? And Dave went over to the piano and started playing, and he said, yeah, I'll teach him. This is Aaron Copland we're talking about, you know. And, well, Dave ended up being the youngest person ever to get into Juilliard, and has played with every group you can possibly imagine in the world, from Trans-Siberian Orchestra, you know, to Evanescence. He plays with them, you know. And he just happens to live in Bristol, Tennessee. He moved down here a few years ago to play on a Ralph Stanley record. He came down to record and just fell in love with the area here in East Tennessee and Southwest Virginia, and decided to move here. So this is his home base, and because of that, I get to record a lot with him. Just it's always just he blows me away. So I'm just glad that I got the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, so it's a beautiful track. The results are wonderful. So it might be an interesting time to chat about the other players you've got on there, because you've got a sort of full band on a few tracks. Say full band, sort of 4-piece band on a few tracks, and then there's a couple of really enjoyed Kingfisher Creek, the sort of guitar and mandolin duet, and that's Jacob Burleson, isn't it, playing on that?
Yeah, that's Jason's son, Jacob Burleson, who's a great player in anything that he does. It's just incredible what he can play. All the musicians he plays with, or all the instruments he plays with, Volume 5, the great bluegrass group, and he plays guitar with them. And obviously I've known Jacob since he was born, but I've seen him develop over the years into what he is now, and it's just unlimited what the cat can play. Pop, jazz, blues, you name it. He's so good at everything. And he had recorded a solo record. In fact, it never came out. I don't know. I guess they just didn't finish it. And he recorded Kingfisher Creek on that. And he played guitar on it. And he had Stuart Duncan playing fiddle, and Scott Vestal recorded it and played banjo. And man, it was so stout. I mean, it was just such a great track. And the whole record was great. And he just never put it out. And I asked him before we did this record if he was going to do it sometime, if he was going to put it out. And he said, no, I don't think it's ever going to come out. I said, well, do you mind if you and I cut Kingfisher Creek? And he said, yeah, that'd be great. And so, yeah, it worked out good that I could actually do it with him, since he had recorded it himself. But, yeah, that one's, I wrote that one way back when Blue Highway first started, so it was in the mid-90s probably. And glad I finally got a chance to do that one. And then the band is Jacob, and then Ron Stewart on fiddle and banjo. And Ron is a band in a box, man. The guy, I mean, I could have gotten somebody else. I could have waited till Stuart Duncan became available, because he did play on a few of my other records. But he's so busy, and he's playing in Allison and Robert Plant's tour. And so he's hard to get a hold of. And I thought, well, why not? Ron's going to be here. He's going to play banjo. Just have him play fiddle too. And he just murdered. Like Margaret Falls is some of the best fiddle time I've ever heard. He blew me away again. Same thing he did on Alexander Mill. And he's just one of those guys. There's not a lot of them who are that good on everything they play, but to me, he's as good as anybody on both the fiddle and the banjo. So, lucky to get him. And then Cameron Keller is the bass player for the Lonesome River Band. And Cam actually lives just a few miles from me here. And he was local, and he was available, and he just happens to be one of the best acoustic bass players out there in the bluegrass scene today. So I looked out there, and I've known Cam since he was little too. His aunt, Minabelle Keller, is married to Keith Williams, who sang on my first record. He sang this song called Bad Reputation, and he's a great singer and one of the best I ever heard. And Minabelle's a really good banjo player too, and so he grew up around all that music when he was young. So glad to get those guys to do. I was going to do more than 2 songs, but just our schedules, it ended up being only 2 songs.
And they sound, I think maybe because they sit amongst some solo stuff and some duets, they really add to the variety, because there are these couple of songs that are a full band. And I think sometimes with a guitar record that's pretty much guitar all the way through, like that variety actually, I think, is a bonus.
Yeah, that's what I kind of thought of it as a palate cleanser. The band, which is an unusual way to think about it, but you do have all these duets, and I don't have any trios on there. I've recorded some trios in the past. I did a version of Temperance Reel with Adam Steffi and Gavin Largent on acoustic guitar. But I didn't do any on this record, and I thought, well, I'll just have duets, trios, and the band cuts. And I'm thinking of them as a way to, make everything, clear everything up, and you can go back to listening to the regular, solos and duets. So, yeah, everything works out. It's just different, every time, depending on the circumstances and how much time you've got and who you can get to do it, money. There's all kinds of things that go into it,
Yeah, and given we've been talking about tone, and because you list them on the sort of the CD, I'd just be cool to talk about the guitars you use for a minute, because the three that are listed on there, your 34 D18, 2007 D18 Authentic, and your Tim Cotton Stafford model.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious so I don't really know much about Cotton guitars. I'd like to hear a bit about that one, if that's all right.
Well, Gary Cotton approached me. He's a builder from Eastern Kentucky a few years back about doing a signature model, and he built a prototype. Actually built two, and a guy named David Yates from here in Johnson City, Tennessee, has the other one. And so there's only two. We did it, and things didn't work out to where we ended up going any further with it. That solo or that signature model, but I've still got that guitar, and it's a great guitar. So I usually use it for the open C tunes that I do, like Hick It Straight that's on this record is one. A Slow Loris is a fingerpick tune that is in that open C tuning. But I've done other songs like Obsession, Janet's Tune. There've been a bunch of others from some of the other records that I've done. They've all been in that it's open C9 tuning. And that guitar sounds great in that tuning. So I actually just kept it here in that tuning, and I would pick it up every now and then and play that, But then I tuned it up to standard one day, and I thought, this thing sounds really good, I need to start playing it some more. So I played it on a couple of tunes on this record, and same with the Authentic, it's my main road guitar that I play with Blue Highway, but I just had it there in the studio in case we had some other tunes to get a little difference from the 34, because I played the 34 on most of the cuts. But I picked up that Authentic, man, it sounded great on a couple of tunes, so I used it. I think that's it on While My Guitar Gently Weeps. And it may be it on Both Sides Now, although I think that's the 34. So, the whole thing is, too, I've played on the acoustic guitar. I actually played a couple of my J45s, my Gibsons. I got a couple of Banner Gibsons from the 40s. And they've got a certain tone to them that really fits. Like I had a song called Coburn Banner on my Tunes and Ballads records. Well, I got the guitar in Coburn, Virginia, and it's a Banner. So that's how the tune got its name. But it's a ragtimey kind of song, fingerpick. So it felt right to use that guitar for that. The ragtimey sort of song on this record is Rhode Island Red, which is a flat pick tune. And I thought, well, just go ahead and use the 34, the D18 on that one. So it really depended on the tune, which guitar I used, although a few times I thought, I'm just use this to see how it sounds. And they're good sounding guitars, so I'm just going to play what I got.
I was listening to, I think it was Clock Old Hen, just such huge bass tone on that, whatever. I presume that's the 34.
No, that's actually the Cotton.
Oh wow! Because the bass is just like the resonance, but it's got that sort of hugeness, but it's really defined at the same time.
Yeah, it does have that quality. It's a mahogany guitar with a spruce top, but it does have great separation. seems like all the great dreads that people put together these days have that really cool separation in the bass that make them such great mic guitars. When you play on the mic with mahogany guitars these days that are, and it could be any of them, it could be the Bourgeois, could be the Merrills, could be, Collings is making some great dreads that are mahoganies, Preston Thompson. They all seem to have that real defined Santa Cruz bottom end that's, like you said, it separates the notes, but it's still a big boomy bass too, Not Rosewood. It's a different thing than a Rosewood sound. But yeah, that Cotton, man, I usually play, like I said, I played on all the C9, and that was a C9 song, the way I did Cluck Up In. And so I decided to use that guitar for that. But yeah, I played it for Ron. What I wanted it to be the old time version of Cluck Up In, not the bluegrass version that most people know from Ron Block's version from Every Time You Say Goodbye, which I was on that too, but I didn't play any lead on that. I just played rhythm. I love that version of that, by the way, the Ron's version, but I wanted to do the old time fiddle version, which is what I heard first. Ron said, "Let's do Cluck O'Hen." And I said Cluck O'Hen. The way he did it, it was sort of based, I think his version is sort of based on Ralph's version of Cluck O'Hen, Ralph Stanley. And so it's a little different approach to it. But mine is definitely more old-timey.
Yeah, it's a cool track. I really like that one. And the other thing, sort of, talking about reading about the guitars on the sort of the artwork on the album, it also says on there, this album is dedicated to the memory and legacy of Tony Rice. And yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I know that Tony means a lot to you and his music means a lot. And I wonder why sort of, that particularly made it onto this record.
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking of Tony a lot here lately. And, I don't think his memory's in danger of dying anytime soon, man. It's like he has such a body of work, and there's so many people that were so affected by it that you've got people like yourself. You've got people like the guy that does Tony Units on Instagram. That's an incredible source of rare live recordings and great graphics. If anybody hasn't seen that, you got to check it out. But that's helping to keep Tony's legacy alive every day, and then there's the Tony Rice Rules Facebook website, and there's a few other things that are going on. So I don't think there's any danger of that happening. I just, you did this masterful 40th anniversary thing about Church Street Blues, and I thought it got me thinking a lot about that record and about how it was Tony's solo record, and I thought, well, this is a solo guitar record that I'm doing. And I thought, he was just on my mind, and I thought, I didn't want to do a huge long dedication list like a normal record. I just thought, well, I'll just dedicate this record to Tony. And I think that people will be listening to Tony Rice stuff for a long time. I don't know how long it's going to be. It's going to be probably over 100 years. Who knows?
Yeah.
I don't think anybody's going to come along like that,
And as long as people are being inspired by that and, thinking of Tony when they make music and taking that and making it their own, that's what lives on, isn't it? Is the influence and that energy is picked up and carried through and handed on to somebody else. And it's a lovely thing.
It is. And he always was very kind about my playing. And I think part of it was that he knew I wasn't trying to sound like him, but I was definitely inspired by him. And that's what he liked. He liked that kind of approach. And that's what he did himself with Clarence. He's like, he always said, I wanted to play just like Clarence White, and I couldn't do it. And so my style emerged as a result of my limitations. And I'm like, well, okay, dude, well, I tried to play like you and I couldn't do it. So I guess my style emerged, as my limitation in trying to play like Tony. But you listen enough to stuff and it just seeps in. It's like the jazz guitar seeped into his playing. It's a jazz piano seeped into his playing because he listened to it so much, and the horn playing, Miles Davis and John Coltrane, I hear that phrasing in his playing, and I guarantee you he never sat down and learned that stuff, There may have been one or two tunes, like I know he did an artist on one of his records, but I don't think that's the way he operated. He listened so much to that music that it just seeped into him. It seeped into his playing, And Tony's playing is like that for me. It's just I've listened to it so much, especially his rhythm guitar. It's like the place you go to start, For me, when you're playing, you're coming up with stuff in a bluegrass band setting. So.
And I think that sort of loops us back to what we were talking about at the beginning. Those 5 T's of timing, tone, tuning, technique, and that 5th T of taste. Is you put all of that stuff in, and what comes back out of you, how that filters and distorts and is added to, and that's the taste. You find the stuff, and all the stuff goes in, and then what comes out is you. And that's why that's why I love listening to this record. It's just full of personality.
Well, it's me. It's what I can do. I mean, and I guess I could try to do an album of Django covers. Would be kind of ridiculous. Or I could do a cover album of somebody else, but that just don't come naturally to me. I just would rather get these tunes that are in my head that have been in for a long time out, so I don't have to deal with them anymore. And maybe some people can play along with them and maybe be inspired at some point to play their own stuff, same way. I think that's what we do as musicians. It's like we try to, we're having fun doing this, but, you feel like you try to be an example for other people maybe in that way and say, well, I can do this, you can too. To me, that was the cool thing about Tony is once I realized, you could actually play the stuff that he's playing. At first I thought you couldn't because it was so hard. It seemed like it was so much, But what an inspiration he was. Like, wow, I can do this too, or I can come up with my own stuff too, So yeah, it's a way of communicating by example. And I guess that's how we'll leave it.
Yeah, and you've got those tunes out of your head and they're in mine now, so it worked.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good luck. I'm really enjoying this record, and I will be enjoying it for some time to come. It's it's a joy, and best of luck with it. I hope it does really well for you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. It just started getting played on Sirius radio, so maybe that'll get a wider cachet, and that'll help things. But yeah, I'm just glad to still be doing this after all this time, and I still have a lot of tunes. I need to find somebody I can teach all these tunes to, or to leave them to, that can learn them and say, hey, record these after I'm gone, because I've got way too many. I'm not going to be able to do enough solo records to get all those tunes out there. So
it's a great album.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it so much.
Well, and thanks for taking the time to come and talk about it. It's always a joy to talk to you, Tim.
Oh, yeah. Same here, man.